Imagine a life where nothing can break your spirit, a life where criticism bounces off you like a ball off a wall, failures become mere stepping stones to success, and betrayal leaves no mark on your heart. Isn't that what each of us dreams of? Tired of the gnawing pain that eats away from the inside, even when a mask of well-being is frozen on our face? Perhaps you are striving to please everyone, maintaining the image of an indestructible fortress, while the only desire is to shed this burden of immense responsibility for just a moment. But let me reveal a truth that many keep silent about. By avoiding pain, you only give it the reins of your life. By trying to suppress feelings in an attempt to protect yourself, to hide from the outside world, you become a prisoner of circumstances, a slave to words that cause suffering, actions that bring disappointment, and silence that slowly kills from within. And this is not a sign of weakness, but a harsh reality familiar to most people, although some succeed in the art of hiding their true feelings. According to Carl Jung, an outstanding thinker in the field of depth psychology, our essence is determined not by circumstances, but by a conscious choice of life path. There is a deep truth in this. It's not about isolation from the world, not about insensitivity and invulnerability, but about the integrity of the personality. It is necessary to bring to light all the hidden factors that affect us, because true strength lies not in the absence of pain, but in the full awareness of oneself, even in moments of emotional suffering. If you are watching this, then you are here for a reason. This is an appeal to those who are tired of self-torture, to those who feel vulnerable, as if others have some incomprehensible power over them. It is important to realize that this should not be your fate, but it will require facing painful truths that may bring liberation for the first time. It is widely believed that the source of pain is outside, in the actions of others, in careless words, in the experienced feeling of abandonment, in unexpected betrayals. However, the harsh truth is that none of this can cause harm if there is not already an unhealed wound inside. Pain is not caused by what others do, but by what these events awaken in us. This is a personal interpretation of what happened, an unworked trauma from the past, an inner emptiness that we are trying to hide behind a mask of strength, pride, and a desperate desire to appear prosperous. Carl Jung offers a deep understanding of human suffering, arguing that the pain we feel in the face of external reality is an echo of unresolved internal conflicts. Surprisingly, it is this fact that explains why some people are able to maintain composure even in the most difficult circumstances, while others break under the burden of minor remarks. The key factor here is not the event itself, but how it resonates with the inner world of a person. In this context, an unpleasant but important truth arises. Suffering stems from a deeply rooted belief in the possibility of controlling the world's attitude towards oneself. A person desperately strives to be good enough, smart enough, or strong enough, naively believing that this can guarantee protection from pain and disappointment. However, control over the external world is just an illusion. Attempts to maintain this illusion lead to constant tension, to exhausting attempts to predict the unpredictable and avoid the inevitable. To free yourself from suffering, you need to abandon protection from it. Instead of increasing control, greater awareness is required. As long as a person believes that their well-being depends on changes in the behavior of others, they remain captive to the actions of others. True freedom begins with the realization that external influences gain power only when they find an internal response. It is in the depths of the unconscious that the real battle unfolds. Invisible, incomprehensible, and uncontrollable aspects of the psyche control a person. In the following sections, the author invites the reader to prepare for a deeper immersion into these hidden areas, where the true transformation of the personality begins. There is a common misconception that a person is the full master of their destiny. However, let's face it, this is far from the case, at least as long as the individual continues to go with the flow, like a boat without a rudder and sails, mechanically reacting to external stimuli without bothering to ask why, experiencing a storm of emotions without trying to understand their origins, making decisions that they themselves later torpedo. The insightful Carl Jung noted that as long as the unconscious remains in the shadows, it inexorably directs a person's life, who naively believes that everything that happens is nothing more than a predetermined fate. And alas, this is what happens to most people. Excruciating pain, sudden bursts of anger, unprovoked sadness washing over you like a dark wave, these are not random occurrences. They are signals sent by parts of your personality that have been forgotten, ignored, or forcibly suppressed. Jung called this terra incognita, the unconscious. And it's not just a vague cloud of indistinct thoughts, but a powerful force, a treasure trove of memories, traumas, hidden desires, and irrational fears that a person stubbornly refuses to face. However, it is these unprocessed deposits that continue to subtly determine feelings and actions, guiding life along invisible tracks. It sometimes seems surprising how certain phrases can deeply wound one person, while another remains completely indifferent to them. The reason lies in the fact that the words touch on sore spots that are still bleeding inside. These wounds have not healed, but have only been hidden under a thick layer of psychological defenses, which a person continues to stumble over in their life. As Carl Jung wisely noted, you cannot change what is not accepted. Condemnation only oppresses, instead of liberating. And what does a person do? They condemn themselves, suppress their feelings, force themselves to be silent, naively believing that this will solve the problem. But the unconscious does not disappear from being ignored. It only finds more sophisticated ways to manifest itself. In destructive relationships that are repeated over and over again, in patterns of self-sabotage that cannot be broken, in anxieties and fears that arise in moments of apparent well-being. This is not a cruel fate, but a desperate attempt by the unconscious to awaken a person who stubbornly refuses to wake up. In an effort to avoid pain, a person only becomes a puppet of their own emotions. The more they try to protect themselves from external wounds, the more vulnerable they become to internal suffering. But there is a way out, not in flight and protection, but in the integration of oneself. Invulnerability is not an act of resistance, but the result of deep self-knowledge. This is what we will discuss further. What does it really mean to be an unbreakable person? And why does this steadfastness grow not from armor, but from the depths of acceptance? Let's try to figure it out. The vast majority of people mistakenly believe that the only way to avoid emotional pain is to build impregnable walls around themselves. They create impenetrable masks, cultivate emotional armor, trying to convince others and themselves that nothing can affect them. They say, I don't care, nothing can hurt me. But deep down they continue to bleed, slowly destroying themselves from within. The problem, however, lies not in the ability to feel, but in the inability to recognize and understand one's feelings. This happens to those who have not yet known their true selves. Carl Jung was absolutely right when he said, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but when you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. And this very human soul, which we so stubbornly try to hide behind the mask of a strong and vulnerable and controlling character, desperately cries out to be seen and heard. Becoming emotionally strong does not mean turning into an insensitive idol. It does not mean ignoring pain, avoiding conflict situations, or pretending that you don't care about what is happening. On the contrary, it involves integration, acceptance, and bringing to light everything that we once buried in the hidden corners of our soul. It is impossible to gain invulnerability by building barriers between yourself and the outside world. A person becomes invulnerable when they realize that no one can touch what has already been accepted and integrated within them. When we accept our shadows, fears, shortcomings, and complexes, we stop blindly reacting to everything we see around us. We begin to consciously choose our reaction, ceasing to be an emotional puppet. And this is true freedom. Jung called this phenomenon individuation, emphasizing its essence as a journey to the authentic self. This is not simply conforming to the expectations of others or imposed ideas about oneself for the sake of recognition, but rather unlocking the potential dormant in the depths of consciousness, at the intersection of light and shadow, between the ego and the unconscious. Individuation, according to Jung, is not a striving for perfection, but rather a process of achieving wholeness. There is no need for self-improvement. It is enough to accept yourself in all your fullness. The key secret, often overlooked, is that avoiding pain only intensifies its pursuit. And attempts to shield oneself from feelings make a person more vulnerable. However, when an individual bravely looks at their wounds, accepting themselves with all their merits and demerits, nobility and shameful sides, external factors lose their destructive power. This path requires courage. The courage to look within, to shed masks, and to fully experience all emotions. For it is in pain that the key to transformation lies. In the following exploration, we will reveal how suffering, contrary to popular belief, can become not an enemy, but a gateway to true strength. Immersing oneself in this topic allows one to view suffering without fear or prejudice. From an early age, humanity is conditioned to reject pain, taught that suffering is the domain of the weak. Tears are a useless waste of time, and an excess of emotion makes one vulnerable. Consequently, individuals begin to avoid, deny, and flee from any manifestation of discomfort. However, the more desperately one tries to escape suffering, the more persistently it pursues, often changing its guise, masquerading as anxiety, anger, apathy, boredom, or even self-destructive impulses, the nature of which remains a mystery. Ignored pain does not disappear without a trace. It carves its path like underground tunnels within the human being, until one tragic moment when everything collapses. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, held a completely different view on the nature of suffering. He believed that pain is a messenger of the soul, a distress signal sent by the unconscious, a unique language used by the self, the essence of a person in all its fullness, to attract attention. Jung compared depression to a lady in black, whom one should not push away upon her arrival. On the contrary, she should be invited in, offered a cup of coffee, and listened to attentively for her message. However, instead of heeding the inner voice, one prefers to silence themselves, distract themselves, maintain constant tension, and dull their senses. They are willing to do anything rather than face what truly matters. The logical question arises: what is this pain trying to show? What message does it carry? The truth is that agonizing sensations reach such intensity only when one continues the internal struggle. Deep within their being, one part strives for growth and change, while the other desperately clings to the familiar and established. An inner force calls for transformation, but the ego, with its desire for control, tries to suppress this call. It is in this internal conflict that pain is born, for change, personal growth, and the rejection of outdated beliefs are always painful. Breaking away from toxic relationships and bidding farewell to what no longer serves is a kind of mourning, a deep internal process of dying and rebirth. However, it is in this space of destruction that the opportunity for something new arises. When everything within a person undergoes deconstruction, when old certainties crumble and pain exposes their vulnerability, they finally get a chance to see their true essence, without protective layers, without imposed roles and masks. And in that very moment, suffering acquires a sacred meaning, for it brings one to their knees before the only thing that can liberate them, themselves. As Jung keenly observed, suffering is not a system error, but an integral part of the process. Pain is not a dead end, but the beginning of a fascinating journey to self-discovery and individuality. Many fail, unable to overcome the difficult period of self-discovery. They seek salvation in escape, distractions, and superficial solutions. However, if you, the reader, have reached this stage, it means you are ready for the transition. In the following sections, we will examine the process of this transition, the path of individuation, which, despite its apparent solitude and severity, is the key to liberation. Only a few possess enough courage to embark on the path of individuation, and even fewer are capable of completing it. This path does not promise comfort and provides no guarantees. It does not protect the ego, but destroys it. Jung defined individuation as the process of becoming oneself, which primarily implies rejecting false notions about oneself. This is more painful than any external blow, as one realizes that much of what defined them until now was merely an illusion. A person is not their achievements, their traumas, or the image created to be loved, respected, or admired. All of this was created for survival, but survival is not life. Individuation is the call of life beyond survival. At this moment, the unconscious begins to push to the surface all that has been suppressed, hidden, and distorted. Carl Jung argued that to achieve individuation, it is necessary to get rid of the persona, the social mask created for the convenience of the collective. Essentially, it is about shedding the familiar shell and looking inward into one's true essence. It is in this challenging process that invulnerability is born, not in the sense of insensitivity, but as a result of trials overcome. A person who has been through the fire, faced their inner monsters, and experienced shame, need, and anger, and managed to say to them, "I see you, and you no longer have power over me," gains inner clarity and awareness. This awareness of one's own darkness becomes a source of strength that does not depend on external approval, recognition, or control. There is no longer a need to please everyone, win every argument, or appear strong, as an unwavering knowledge of oneself emerges. True emotional armor is not an external shell, but an internal core, the result of integrating all parts of the personality in the center of consciousness, capable of withstanding any of life's storms. A person may experience pain, but it will not break them. They may suffer, but they will not lose themselves, because they have stopped being a puppet of circumstances and have attained wholeness. They have stopped skimming the surface of life and have begun to explore its depths. However, this immersion in oneself comes at a price: loneliness. And it is not about physical solitude, but about the fact that few are able to share this path. Most people still remain on the surface, hiding behind masks and fearing their own feelings. When a person begins to break free from these shackles, a distance inevitably arises with those who are not yet ready for such changes. But this distancing is not rejection, but a sign of personal growth and maturity. A person distances themselves from their usual environment not out of arrogance, but because they no longer find a place for themselves where they once sought refuge. And this naturally leads to the final stage of the journey, awareness, which acts as a shield. After all, it is not brute force, but clarity of consciousness that becomes true protection. This refers to consciousness as a state in which nothing has power over a person. The author suggests completing this transition together, emphasizing that the goal is already near. It is important to realize that no external factors can protect from emotional suffering as long as a person remains unaware of what is happening in their inner world. Words will continue to hurt, failures will sting, and losses will plunge into despair until awakening occurs. And this awakening is not a fleeting miracle, but a daily, conscious choice. It is a look inside oneself, even when it is painful. It is taking responsibility for one's own feelings, refusing to blame others, the past, or fate. As Carl Jung said, what you resist persists. What you accept transforms you. Throughout life, a person may have resisted the fear of not being good enough, the emptiness that arises after rejection, the pain of loneliness, and the agonizing feeling of their own insignificance. But what did they do with it? They hid, suppressed themselves, tried to control everything and everyone, strived for perfection, and pretended to be strong. And in the end, this led them to exhaustion, tired of fighting the world and themselves. Now, however, they realize that true emotional immunity is not insensitivity, but clarity of consciousness. It is not about creating impenetrable armor, but about expanding the boundaries of awareness. After all, when a person understands their triggers, their behavioral patterns, their emotional wounds, the actions of other people lose the ability to destroy them. They still experience feelings, but do not drown in them. They still suffer, but do not lose themselves. And this radically changes everything. Genuine protection lies not in trying to shield oneself from life's adversities, but in the courageous and conscious acceptance of all its manifestations. Superficial existence makes a person vulnerable in the face of the slightest shocks, while a deep immersion in life opens access to an inner source of peace, resilience, and strength. It is in this depth that true support is found. When a person begins to live from a state of inner wholeness, awareness, and acceptance, they become practically invulnerable to external influences. The world may try to knock them down, but all attempts are futile, as they do not find any pain points. Integration with oneself creates a solid foundation that allows one to withstand any of life's storms.